Welcome to today's session called Own Your Conflict Style. So we're here to learn to communicate without conflict with tools from the Mediator's Toolkit. I'm Arabella Tresillian, and I'm an accredited mediator and the founder of Peaceable. So my background in conflict resolution goes back now nearly 10 years. I run my own practice. I'm registered with the Civil Mediation Council. And Peaceable is the community where I share some of my learning over the years. I'm also a mental health first aid instructor, though I no longer practice. But the aspect of well-being is a really important part of conflict resolution for me. I work particularly with sensitive people who really struggle with conflict, estrangement, isolation, and we all know how much that can affect our mental health. So in today's session, you're welcome to gently bring a current or a past situation to mind if you like. We're going to be talking about our own conflict styles, but also at times you might want to think about someone else that you have perhaps had a disagreement or a difficult time with, or who's important to you, and think about their conflict style as well. So in the session, we're going to be looking at the different ways that people tend to respond in conflict and how our personality shapes our conflict style according to the TKI tool. That's the Thomas Kilmann conflict management instrument tool, which will be the focus of our session today. We'll ask ourselves why misunderstandings and disconnection happen, even with good intentions. And we'll recognize how our own style and others having an understanding of it can open new ways to communicate. And we'll think about small, realistic shifts that can support repair, understanding, and connection. So I'd like to start with this beautiful quote from the poet Rumi, who says, "Beyond ideas of right and wrong, there is a field. I'll meet you there." And that's really what this is all about. It's about us understanding how our conflict styles show up and have us stuck in these polarities of I'm right, you're wrong, or just disagreement, which keeps us apart from each other. But I do very much believe that there is a field in which that polarity is overcome, and understanding our conflict styles can really help us get there. I mentioned I work particularly with sensitive people, and I would count myself as one of those. And this beautiful book called Sensitive says the sensitive way is the belief deep down that quality of life is more valuable than raw achievement, that human connection is more satisfying than dominating others, and that your life is more meaningful when you spend time reflecting on your experiences and leading with your heart. So this is very much heartfelt work, I would say. It requires us to have the openness to look at ourselves with love and with self-compassion and with curiosity, and also to apply those traits and characteristics to the people that we're thinking about as well. Because sometimes we may feel like we are disconnected from those around us. There's a well-known book called Surrounded by Idiots by Thomas Erickson. It's a great title, but it points to the fact that sometimes we can look at other people around us and think, why are they so idiotic, or why are they at least so very different? And this book points to the 4 types of human behavior and says how to understand those who cannot be understood. In other words, it's about saying that there are different personality types, and these colors may be familiar to you because they're based on the very well-known DISC personality types, and that's really what the book is about. And this is used a lot in workplaces for colleagues, particularly within teams, to understand each other's style and manner. so that they can work better together, but also be more understanding and forgiving of each other at times. Let's have a quick look at this, starting at the red corner, which is, so the red disc style is known to be dominant. And a dominant person might be direct, decisive, and a doer, but sometimes they can be seen as domineering or demanding. Whereas the yellow influential style can be seen as inspirational, interactive, and interesting. But equally, those people can be accused of being impulsive or irritating. Going on round, we have the green steady style, stable, supportive, and sincere, but maybe some would see them as too slow or too sensitive. And then finally, we have the blue compliance style, cautious, careful, conscientious, but to some they can seem calculating or even condescending. But if you look at the compass points here, you will see that what we've got at play are different aspects, like someone who is active up at the top, at north, then round someone with a people focus, then going round someone who's more reflective, and then going round again someone who's more task focused. So life, nurture, nature, schooling, past experiences, past career, past relationships influence us. And I do think that we change our characteristics as we go along. We're not kind of born into one of these and we stay there forever. This is just a lens, really, for looking at ourselves and acknowledging our difference, that we are different, and that is part of life's rich tapestry. Similarly, you may have come across the Myers-Briggs type indicator, and you can access this for free on 16personalities.com. The link is there. And that gives us 16 different variations. And I found this to be very useful for use in a non-scientific way, because we need to treat these lightly as signals that we can interpret for ourselves. But the clients I work with often find that this is a very helpful way to feel seen and to feel understood and to feel validated. And sometimes in mediation, my clients might exchange their Myers-Briggs type and say what they agree with and what they don't agree with in whatever it is that that the quiz came up with as being their type. I, for example, came up as a mediator, and it was one of the things that finally made me take the leap from thinking about going into mediation as a career for 7 or 8 years into actually training, because this test allowed me to see that my traits of wanting fairness and justice and wanting people to get on were particular to me, and that actually maybe that's something that I could bring to others and it would have value. So we started by asking ourselves about our personality types as a way to just beginning to observe ourselves. And as we can begin to own or inquire into our personality type, we can also begin to own or inquire into our conflict style. And often people might say, okay, thanks, but I don't get into conflicts. This doesn't apply to me. To which I might say, oh, really? Is that the case? Because actually, conflict is a very natural and even important part of life. It's how we discern things. It's how we make important decisions in a mutual fashion. It can be how we negotiate. It's just that it can escalate and be very painful. And it can also end up being hidden. And we'll look more at that later. Let's have a look at Glasel's conflict stairs to think a little bit more deeply about conflict itself. So even if you think conflict doesn't apply to you, I'm sure at some point you've experienced some degree of tension. You've maybe been in disagreement about something with someone, you felt reluctant to say no. And that's the very first step of the conflict stairs. Maybe you might feel strongly enough about it that you would get into a debate or an argument with that other person. You would exchange reasoning. If that didn't work out, you might go to step 3, which is avoidance. And the thing about the green steps is that there's still potential for win-win. Sometimes avoiding things is just the best way and it kind of goes away. But we do want to recognize and address conflict at that point in case it escalates, because once it gets to this amber set of stairs, 4, 5, and 6, then we start to move into a win-lose space where one person or party might win and the other might lose. And actually, that can be damaging for relationships. So at step 4, we have alliance and attack. And that's where people start to take sides or maybe call names of each other. At step 5, we've got loss of face. I've stood up for what I believe in, and if I lose, then I'm going to lose face. And that's going to be embarrassing and humiliating and maybe have an impact that's greater than that. So at step 6, people can start to issue threats. They become quite dogged or demanding, and suddenly the ante is upped significantly. If things aren't resolved, then we can move into the red zone, 7, 8, and 9. And this is the lose-lose zone. Stage 7 is destruction. Those threats are carried out and the consequences are felt. At number 8, people will start to eliminate each other or themselves. In the workplace, I'm seeing this as things like people resigning or sacking. But then there's point 9, step 9, the point of no return. And that's also known as into the abyss together. And that's really where people allow the conflict to totally take over. Maybe you've seen some of those neighbors who fought for so long over the positioning of a fence that they both ran up legal costs that exceeded the value of their house. That's an example of step 10. So if we can understand our conflict style, we can nip things in the bud and make sure that we're dealing with things right down at the beginning of the scale here. So let me introduce the Thomas Kilmann conflict mode instrument. It starts with 2 axes. On the bottom, cooperativeness. Someone might be less cooperative or more cooperative. And on the vertical, we have assertiveness. Someone might be fairly unassertive or quite assertive. So these are 2 of the key characteristics that we're talking about when we use the Thomas Kilmann conflict mode instrument. Their research showed that the turning up and down of the dials of cooperativeness and assertiveness was one of the ways in which we could understand conflict styles. And another way of deciphering those 2 axes is to say that cooperativeness is about relationship. Someone who's high in cooperativeness will say, our relationship matters. It really matters. Whereas someone on the high assertiveness scale might say, the issue matters. It's the principle. It's what should be. It's what ought to be. And they will stand by it assertively. And both of these priorities may have good intent. The person who wants the best for the relationship is serving the relationship. The person who is asserting for the issues is standing up for principle. They may both have good intent, but intent and impact are not the same things. And actually, if we're not aware of how our sort of priorities are showing up, we can have unintended impacts or unintended consequences, which may increase or level up a conflict. So let's see how these play out with 5 different conflict styles. You may already be asking yourself, am I more higher or lower in assertiveness, higher or lower in cooperativeness. Well, let's start with somebody who is low on cooperativeness and low on assertiveness. And with Thomas Kilmann, we often in our industry apply some animals as well in a playful manner to help simplify what we mean. So let me introduce you to the first quadrant. So someone who is uncooperative and unassertive can be seen as being avoiding. That is the conflict style that we tend to use, an avoiding conflict style. They might say, least said, soonest mended. Don't bring it up. Just pretend it hasn't happened. I'm not saying anything about it. But the thing is that that can come across as an ostrich putting their head in the sand or a tortoise withdrawing itself. And actually, that means that the person isn't necessarily standing up for the issue or for the relationship. And while they may say, I'm a person who doesn't do conflict, what this avoiding conflict style is about is not engaging with the disagreement to resolve it. So let's move on to someone who is maybe much more on the cooperative end of things, but low in assertiveness. Well, they can be seen as being accommodating. They'll say, oh, of course, if that's what you want. They kind of give up their own needs or wants or aspirations in favor of the other person, particularly if the other person is higher in assertiveness. But that means that they can become like a chameleon, just kind of blending into whatever color is around them and not really bringing themselves. Or maybe we can see them as a teddy bear, just soft and squidgy and pliable and kind of not strong in themselves, but just bending to whatever is needed. And that might be being done to serve the relationship, but sometimes it's being done to stay safe. We feel that there's a danger in asserting our needs and our wants. Let's have a look at somebody who is maybe high in assertiveness, but rather low in cooperativeness. We can see that they might be seen as a racehorse because this quadrant here is called the competing quadrant, where the person says, it's my way or the highway. Now, the thing about this is they may feel very principled and stand up for their beliefs, but they will canter off to the finish line like a racehorse, getting this thing over the line at whatever cost, including leaving everyone else behind them. And the leaving everyone else behind them is where the relationships get ruptured or disrupted, or people get hurt or offended. And this kind of competing person can feel very strongly about their beliefs, but maybe they need to learn some better negotiation skills so that they can preserve the relationship while advocating for the issues. So next we have something right in the middle. And you might say, isn't that what good conflict management is all about? It's about compromising. In compromising, we say, I'll make you a deal. And that's fair enough because negotiation is really what it's all about. As a mediator, my job is to be a negotiation facilitator. But the thing is that we can end up in a kind of lose-lose situation sometimes. Here we've got the wily fox who makes a bit of a deal, and we've got the zebra who's a bit of this and a bit of that. The thing about compromising is that largely it sees both parties not quite getting what they want. And this brings us to the last of the conflict styles. What happens if we really nurture and care for the relationship and really stand up for and advocate for the issues? That's when we move into the collaborating management style, where we say two heads are better than one. And here we have the wise owl who looks at the situation from afar and brings some wisdom, or the dolphins who swim in a pod together and work well together and communicate really well with each other. And I must say that in mediation, this is what I see. People come in thinking it's my way or the highway, or I can't stand up for myself, or I'm not here to make friends, or I'm not giving way. But actually, when people understand each other's needs and desires, both in terms of relationship and in terms of issues, then they start to have better empathy for each other. They start to see their common interests, and they start to come up with some really innovative ideas. It's a classic 1 + 1 = 3 situation. So what you can see here is that my encouragement to you would be to think about how can you work in your relationships to create cooperation between yourselves, and also to serve the issues that are important to you and the other person. So often we're a mix of conflict styles. I have to say, I absolutely used to be an avoiding person. I really didn't like conflict. And at a real push, I would be accommodating. In fact, over time, I was just managing a bunch of avoiding and accommodating. I didn't feel safe or secure to necessarily advocate for the issues that were important. I thought it would rupture my relationships. Needless to say, then from time to time, I'd get terribly upset and probably move directly into competing. So you can get into these strange little loops with your conflict styles. The important thing is to be aware of them, and then very gently you can start to make some small shifts to become a little bit more assertive or a little bit more cooperative. And equally, having established your pattern of conflict styles, maybe you can think about the other person or people in your life and say, what might their conflict style be? And here's the important thing. There are no right or wrong conflict styles. There are only new ways of approaching conflict more effectively. So, having reflected on your conflict style, and perhaps on theirs too, here's a task for you. What are some small, realistic shifts you could make in your interpersonal communication to support repair, understanding, and human connection? Take a moment now to just write down some ideas. What is it that will help you become more assertive, to stand up for those issues that are important, and to perhaps become more cooperative, more open to listening, more open to meeting somebody halfway, and then even better, collaborating with them and coming up with really good ideas together. So I wish you all the best in owning your conflict style. And I thank you for your time with me today. Bye for now.